The first thing I noticed wasn't what they said. It was how often they started showing up. After my husband died, I expected silence. Awkward phone calls, maybe a casserole or two, then everyone drifting back to their own lives. That's how it usually goes, right? But that's not what happened. Instead, they came more: my sister, my brother-in-law, even cousins I hadn't heard from in years. They knocked on my door with soft smiles and warm hugs, saying things like, "Just checking on you. We were worried about you being alone. You don't have to go through this by yourself." And at first, I believed them because I was tired, because grief does that to you. It makes everything fuzzy, like you're walking around with cotton in your head. I was 69 years old, newly widowed, and honestly, some days I could barely get out of bed. So when they offered help, I said thank you. When they sat in my living room a little too long, I didn't question it. When they asked how I was really doing, I told them the truth. I didn't notice the pattern right away. The way their eyes drifted past me to the walls, to the furniture, to the family photos. The way conversations kept circling back to time. Have you thought about the future? Do you have a plan if something happens? You don't want to be a burden later on. They said it gently, almost sweetly, but something about it made my stomach tighten. One afternoon, my sister reached over and squeezed my hand and said, "You're still strong, but we should be realistic." Realistic. That word sat heavy in the room. Because nothing about my life had changed that much. Yes, my husband was gone. Yes, I was grieving. But I was still living in my own home, still paying my bills, still cooking my own meals. Yet suddenly everyone was talking like I was halfway out the door already, like my life was a closing chapter. And the strangest part, they weren't cruel, they were careful, too careful. Their voices lowered when they spoke around me. They exchanged looks they thought I didn't see. They started using phrases like "when the time comes" and "just in case." I smiled, I nodded, I played along. Because here's the thing they didn't realize yet: I wasn't confused. I wasn't fragile, and I definitely wasn't unaware. I just needed time. Time to listen. Time to watch. Time to understand why everyone suddenly cared so much about what would happen to me after. And when I finally did, that's when I realized something chilling. They weren't afraid of losing me. They were afraid of waiting too long. The second thing I noticed wasn't their visits. It was the questions. They started innocent enough. "How's your sleep been? Are you eating okay? Did you remember to take your medication today?" That last one caught me off guard. Because I hadn't told anyone about medication, I laughed it off. Said something casual like, "Yeah, I've got it under control." But my sister didn't laugh back. She tilted her head slightly and said, "Well, sometimes after a big loss, people forget things." People. Not you, people. Like she wasn't talking about me anymore, just a category I'd quietly slipped into. After that, the questions kept coming. Not all at once. Not aggressively, just enough to feel off. My brother-in-law asked who handled my finances now. A cousin casually mentioned how complicated paperwork could be at my age. Another relative asked if I still drove at night. I hadn't had an accident. I hadn't missed a bill. I hadn't gotten lost, but they were acting like it was already a given. One afternoon, my sister brought over soup, the kind that comes in a store container, not homemade, and sat at my kitchen table watching me eat. Watching. When I finally looked up, she smiled and said, "Just making sure you're keeping your strength up." That's when I felt it. That slow, creeping feeling in my chest. Like I wasn't being cared for, I was being assessed. It reminded me of when my husband was sick years ago, how doctors would ask questions while barely looking at him, already forming conclusions. Only this time, the people doing it were family. And the worst part, they always followed up with reassurance. Oh, don't get upset. We're only asking because we love you. We just want what's best for you, what's best for me. Funny how no one ever asked me what that was. I started answering carefully after that. Short responses, neutral tones, nothing that could be twisted or misunderstood. Because something told me this wasn't about grief anymore. It was about capability. About whether I still counted as fully in control of my own life. And then one night, my sister said something so casually, so quietly, that it stuck with me like a splinter. She sighed and said, "You know, if anything ever happened, we'd step in. You wouldn't even have to worry." Step in, I smiled. I said, "That's good to know." But inside, my mind was racing because I hadn't asked for stepping in. I hadn't asked for help managing my life. And suddenly, I realized something unsettling. They weren't asking if I needed help. They were preparing for when they decided I did. And that's when I stopped being just a grieving widow. That's when I became careful. Because once people start planning for you instead of with you, they usually already have an end in mind. It happened so gradually that I almost missed it. Almost. At first, it was little things. My sister started rearranging pillows when she visited, not asking, just doing it. "Oh, this looks cozier," she'd say like it was nothing. Then one afternoon, she opened a cabinet in my kitchen and frowned. "You still keep the heavy pots down there? That's not very safe." Safe, that word again. She moved them to a higher shelf without waiting for an answer. I watched her do it, standing there with my coffee getting cold, and for the first time, a sharp thought crossed my mind. Why does she feel so comfortable changing things in my house? The visits got longer after that. They didn't knock anymore. They just walked in, using the spare key I'd given her years ago for emergencies. She'd sit in my living room like she belonged there, feet tucked under her, purse on the table, scrolling through her phone while I cooked. One day, she casually said, "You know, this place is a lot for one person." I kept my eyes on the stove, said nothing. She kept talking. "Too many rooms, too many memories. You don't need all this space anymore." That word hit harder than it should have, because this wasn't about space. It was about ownership. Then came the comments about maintenance. The roof's getting old. Stairs like these are risky. Have you thought about selling while the market's good? Selling. There it was. I turned around and looked at her. "Selling to go where?" I asked. She smiled, soft, practiced. "Oh, we'd figure something out. We, not you, not what do you want, just we." That night, after everyone left, I walked through my house slowly. The hallway where my husband used to lean against the wall, teasing me while I folded laundry. The chair by the window where he read every morning. The bedroom that still smelled faintly like his cologne. This wasn't just a house. This was my life. And suddenly I felt like a guest in it, like the walls were listening, like decisions were being made somewhere else without me in the room. I sat down at the kitchen table and stared at the wood grain. That's when I realized something that made my chest tighten. They weren't waiting for me to ask about moving. They were waiting for me to become too tired to argue. And the scariest part, they were acting like time was already on their side. Like this place, my place, was just a temporary inconvenience they were being patient about. I went to bed that night with a strange feeling in my gut. Not fear, not yet, it was something colder. The feeling you get when you realize the rules have changed and no one bothered to tell you. By the 4th week, I stopped pretending everything was normal. Not out loud, not to them, but inside I was wide awake. They thought grief made me slow, that it softened my edges. Truth is, grief sharpened them. Because when you lose someone you've loved for decades, you start paying attention to what's real and what's performance. One afternoon, my sister and my brother-in-law came over together. No call, no heads up. Just a knock, then the door opening like they owned the place. I was in the hallway when I heard my brother-in-law say, "She looks better today." Looks, not is. I paused, didn't move, didn't make a sound. My sister replied, "Yeah, but those days don't last." Then she laughed, not loud, not cruel, just confident. I stood there, heart thumping, listening. "She still thinks she's fine," my brother-in-law said. "But we know how this goes." "How what goes?" My sister lowered her voice. "We just need to be patient. Let things happen naturally." Naturally, like decline was a schedule, like my life was a waiting room. I stepped into the kitchen then, letting my slippers scuff the floor so they'd know I was there. Their faces changed instantly. Concern snapped into place like a mask. "Oh, we didn't hear you," my sister said, hand flying to her chest. I smiled. "Clearly." They both laughed awkwardly, and my brother-in-law said, "We were just talking about how strong you're being." Strong, another word they loved, because it sounded like praise but felt like pity. I poured myself a glass of water slowly, giving myself time. Then I said, casual as could be, "What happens if I don't decline?" The silence that followed, oh, it was loud. My sister blinked. "Well, everyone does eventually." Everyone, there it was again. I took a sip of water and nodded like she'd said something obvious. "Sure," I said, "eventually," but I didn't miss the look they exchanged. That quick flicker of something I hadn't seen before, not concern, not love, calculation. That night lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling. I replayed the words, "Let things happen naturally, we know how this goes." They weren't worried about me falling apart. They were waiting for it. And that's when a thought settled in, heavy and undeniable. They weren't preparing to help me live. They were preparing for me to disappear quietly. And if I didn't, they'd help things along, just gently enough to look like kindness. The first thing they changed wasn't big. That's how they did everything. Small, quiet, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. My sister showed up one morning with a folder tucked under her arm. "Just some paperwork," she said lightly, setting it on my kitchen counter. "Nothing urgent." Nothing urgent is usually code for don't ask questions. I glanced at the folder. Insurance forms, medical authorizations. Things with too many pages and too much fine print. "I figured I could help you stay organized," she added. "You've had a lot on your plate." I smiled. "Funny," I said, "I don't remember asking." She laughed like I'd made a joke. "Oh, I know, I just thought, why not?" "Why not?" Because why not is how people slowly take over your life. She flipped the folder open and started pointing. "This one lets me talk to your doctor if there's ever an emergency. This one's just in case you're unavailable. And this is so we don't run into issues later." Later. Everything was always about later. I picked up one of the papers and skimmed it. Then I froze. Buried in the middle of the page, between harmless-looking paragraphs, was a line that made my pulse spike. "Authorization to make decisions on behalf of." I looked up at her. "This isn't just medical," I said calmly. She didn't miss a beat. "Well, yeah, things overlap. It's standard." Standard. She leaned closer, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. "You don't want the courts involved if something happens, right?" Something happens. There it was again, that vague, looming threat they loved to hide behind. I set the paper down slowly. "I'll read these later," I said. Her smile tightened just a hair. "Of course, take your time." But she didn't move the folder away. She left it right there on my counter in my space. like it already belonged to her. After she left, I sat down and read every page, line by line, word by word, and the more I read, the clearer it became. This wasn't about helping me. This was about access. Access to my doctors. Access to my decisions. Access to my life if I ever hesitated, if I ever slipped, if I ever trusted the wrong moment. By the time I finished, my hands were steady. My mind was clear. They weren't rushing me to sign because I was weak. They were rushing because they were afraid I'd figure it out. And now that I knew exactly what I had to do next. I just had to make sure they never realized how much I understood until it was already too late for them. After the paperwork, something shifted. Not with them, with me. I stopped correcting their assumptions. When my sister said, "You've been forgetting things lately," I didn't argue. I just smiled and said, "Yeah, maybe." When my brother-in-law asked, "Did you already take your meds today?" I shrugged. "I think so." That one really did it. I saw it in his eyes, that flicker of relief. Like I just confirmed something they were hoping for. Because here's the dirty truth no one likes to admit. People don't take control from strong women. They wait for women to appear tired. So I let myself look tired. I moved slower when they were around. I paused before answering questions. I let them repeat themselves. And every time I did, they leaned in closer. Visits increased again. They brought groceries I didn't ask for. Started organizing drawers, suggested routines. "You should really let us handle the harder stuff," my sister said one afternoon while rearranging my mail. "It's just easier this way." Easier for who? I noticed she'd started opening envelopes before handing them to me, bills, bank statements. I watched her eyes skim the numbers before she passed them over. That's when I stopped her. "Why are you opening my mail?" She laughed, quick and light. "Oh, honey, relax. I was just trying to help." "Help, always help," I nodded slowly. "Okay," I said, "just don't throw anything away." Her smile faltered just for a second. That night after they left, I sat at my desk and wrote down everything. Dates, comments, who said what, not because I was scared, but because I was done being naive. I made copies of important documents, moved a few things they didn't know about, and quietly made one phone call they never expected. I didn't tell anyone, not my sister, not my family, because the moment they realized I was still fully in control, their whole plan would fall apart. And I needed them comfortable, confident, just long enough to make their next move because I could feel it coming. They were done testing. Next, they were going to act. They tried to keep it casual. That's what still gets me. My sister called one morning, voice syrupy sweet, like she was doing me a favor. "I made you a doctor's appointment," she said. "Just a check-in, nothing major." I paused. "You made it?" I asked. "Well, yeah," she replied quickly. "You've been through a lot. It's better if I handle those things now." Now, that word again, I almost said no, almost. But something in my gut told me to go, so I did. I showed up early, sat in the waiting room, and watched my sister talk to the receptionist like she ran the place. She filled out forms without asking me a thing. When the nurse called my name, my sister stood up too. "Oh, I'll come with her," she said. I smiled politely. "I'll go in alone." The nurse hesitated. My sister didn't. "She gets confused sometimes," she said quietly. "Better if I'm there." That was it. That was the moment. I turned and looked at my sister, really looked at her. "No," I said, still calm. "I don't." The nurse blinked, then nodded. "Ma'am, she's right. It's her appointment." My sister's face flushed just a little, but I caught it. Inside the exam room, the doctor asked routine questions. How was my sleep? Any dizziness? Any memory issues? I answered clearly, precisely. And when he asked why the appointment was scheduled, I said the truth. My family thinks I'm declining, I told him. I don't. The doctor leaned back, studying me, then he smiled. You seem sharp to me. Sharp, I almost laughed. After the exam, he handed me a clean bill of health. No cognitive issues, no concerns. When I walked back into the waiting room, my sister stood up fast. Well, she asked. I held up the paperwork. All good, I said. Doctor says I'm doing just fine. Her mouth opened, then closed. That's good, she said, but her tone didn't match her words. On the drive home, she didn't talk much. Neither did I, because now I knew something important. They weren't trying to help me confirm my health. They were hoping a professional would do the dirty work for them. And when that didn't happen, they'd have to find another way, something less official, something harder for me to stop. That night, I slept lightly. Because I knew the next step wouldn't involve questions, it would involve paperwork, and this time they wouldn't ask politely. They didn't wait long. 3 days after the doctor's appointment, my sister showed up again. This time, she wasn't smiling. She carried a thick envelope tucked under her arm like it weighed something. Can we sit down? She asked. That's never a good sign. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where my husband and I used to drink coffee every morning, arguing over crossword clues and burnt toast. She placed the envelope between us. I talked to a lawyer, she said. Of course she did. Just to understand options, she added quickly, like that made it better. No one's doing anything drastic. Drastic, I didn't touch the envelope. What kind of options? I asked. She slid it toward me anyway. Planning options, she said. Power of attorney, temporary guardianship, just safeguards. Safeguards, I opened the envelope slowly. Inside were neatly organized documents, clipped, highlighted, flagged with sticky notes like someone had already decided where my signature should go. She leaned in, tapping a page with her finger. This one lets us help manage things if you're overwhelmed. And this one's just to protect the house. The house, there it was. I looked up at her. Protect it from what? She sighed like I was being difficult. From complications. From confusion, from someone else stepping in. Someone else. I flipped through the pages. Legal language. Soft words hiding sharp consequences. If I signed, I wouldn't lose control overnight. That's the trick. I'd lose it slowly. Piece by piece. Decision by decision. Until one day I'd wake up and realize my name was still on the house, but my say wasn't. My sister watched my face closely, too closely. She was waiting for hesitation, for fear. For gratitude, I gave her none of it. I'll think about it, I said, closing the folder. Her jaw tightened. These things take time, she said carefully, and time isn't always on our side. There it was, not my time, their timeline. I stood up, holding the envelope. I'll let you know, I said. She hesitated, then stood too. Soon, she added. We don't want this dragged out, as if my life was an inconvenience. After she left, I locked the door and leaned against it, heart pounding, not with fear, but clarity. They weren't testing anymore. They were pushing. And people only push when they're afraid of losing control. That night, I placed the envelope in a drawer and made another phone call. A different one this time, because if they thought paperwork was their weapon, they had no idea what I already had in place. And when the moment came, I wasn't going to argue. I was going to let them think they'd won. It was almost midnight when I heard voices. I wasn't supposed to. I was already in bed, lights off, house quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the old clock ticking down the hallway. I'd gotten up for water, nothing dramatic, just thirsty. That's when I heard my sister's voice. Lo, careful, she was in the living room on the phone. I stopped walking. Didn't mean to eavesdrop, didn't plan to. But then she said my name. And once you hear your own name spoken softly in the dark, you don't keep moving. She's not stupid, my sister said. She's just tired. I leaned against the wall, heart pounding. She didn't sign yet, she continued. But she will. She doesn't like conflict. Pause. A man's voice replied, calm, confident, not family, probably the lawyer. She lives alone, my sister went on. No kids, no backup. Once things are in motion, she won't have a choice. My stomach dropped. In motion, the man said. That's important. You'll need documentation, a timeline. Timeline, like my life was a project plan, my sister sighed. I just don't want this dragging out, she said. If we wait too long, it gets complicated. Assets, taxes, the house. The house again, always the house. The man said something I couldn't fully hear, legal jargon, and my sister laughed softly. Exactly, she said. Better now than later, before she starts asking questions. Before I start asking questions, I pressed my hand over my mouth, not because I was shocked, but because suddenly everything clicked. This wasn't about care. This wasn't about concern. This was about timing, about moving fast while grief kept me quiet, about making decisions for me while pretending they were with me. She trusts me, my sister added. She always has. That one hurt more than anything else because it was true. The call ended. Footsteps moved toward the guest room. I slipped back into my bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed, shaking, not weak, not broken. Just furious, but quietly furious, because now I knew, not suspected, not guessed, I knew. And when people think you're unaware, they get sloppy. They assume you're already beaten. That night, I didn't sleep, I planned. Because the next time they brought papers into my house, I wasn't going to stop them. I was going to let them believe the lie they needed most, that I still trusted them. And that was going to cost them everything. By the next morning, I had my face back on. The soft one, the tired one, the version of me they were most comfortable with. When my sister called, I answered on the second ring. I've been thinking, I said before she could speak. There was a pause. Just half a second, but I heard it. Oh, she replied, careful not to sound too eager. About the papers, I continued. About everything. I let my voice wobble a little, not too much, just enough. I don't want to fight anymore, I said. I'm exhausted, maybe you're right. That did it. Her tone changed instantly, warm, relieved, almost triumphant. I knew you'd come around, she said gently. This is the smart choice. Smart. I bit the inside of my cheek. Can you come by later? I asked. We can go over everything. She didn't even hesitate. I'll bring the documents, she said. And maybe dinner. You shouldn't be alone tonight. You shouldn't be alone. The words felt different now, like a warning instead of comfort. That afternoon, I did exactly what I always did when I was scared. I prepared. I cleaned the house slowly, deliberately, not because it needed it, but because I wanted everything to look normal. Unremarkable, I laid out the envelope from the lawyer on the table exactly where she'd left it before. I even practiced my signature, not because I planned to use it, but because I wanted them relaxed, confident. Because confident people make mistakes. When my sister arrived, she hugged me tight, too tight. I'm proud of you, she whispered. This isn't easy. I smiled into her shoulder. Inside, I was ice cold. We sat at the table. She spread the papers out neatly, explaining each one again, slower this time, like she was talking to a child. This just gives us flexibility. This avoids problems down the road. This protects everyone but me. I picked up the pen, my hand hovered. She leaned forward, watching. I looked up and said softly, "Promise me something." Her eyes lit up. "Of course." "If I sign," I said, "you won't rush anything. I want time." "I want dignity," she nodded immediately. "Absolutely," she said. "We're not monsters." "Monsters never think they are." I lowered the pen, signed the first page, then the second. Her breathing changed just slightly. I caught it. That little hitch of excitement she tried to hide. By the time I finished, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You did the right thing," she said. I smiled. Because what she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the papers she cared about most, the ones that actually mattered, they had already been handled weeks ago. And by the time they realized what I'd done, there would be nothing left for them to take. Not the house, not my voice, not my life. They thought tonight was the end. It was just the beginning. For the next 2 weeks, they were different. Relaxed, that's the word. My sister stopped hovering. The phone calls slowed down. The tone shifted from concern to quiet satisfaction. They thought it was done. I noticed how quickly people stop pretending once they believe they've won. My brother-in-law joked again. My cousin mentioned future plans without lowering her voice. My sister even said casually, "Well, at least now everything's handled." Handled, like I was a loose end they'd finally tied up. They didn't rush anything after that, just like she promised. And that's exactly what confirmed it for me. Because people who genuinely care don't relax when you sign paperwork. They worry more, they check in, they ask how you're feeling. My family, they started acting like my role in my own life had quietly expired. One afternoon, my sister stood in my kitchen scrolling through her phone and said, "We should probably talk about timelines soon." I looked up from my tea. "Timelines for what?" She hesitated just a beat too long. "You know, transitions." Transitions, that word again, always vague, always harmless sounding. I nodded slowly. "Sure." Inside, I was smiling, because here's what they never bothered to ask: why I hadn't argued, why I hadn't cried, why I hadn't called anyone for reassurance. They assumed silence meant surrender. What they didn't know was that while they were celebrating quietly, I had already moved the house. Not physically, legally. Months earlier, right after my husband died, I'd done something none of them knew about. Something my sister never thought to check. I had placed the house into a living trust, not with family, not with relatives, but with instructions so specific they left zero room for interpretation. The trustee wasn't my sister, wasn't my brother-in-law, wasn't anyone they could pressure. And the terms, ironclad: no transfer, no sale. No temporary control, not unless I decided. The papers I signed for them, they gave access. But access without authority is just noise. They thought they were walking toward ownership. They were actually walking toward a wall. And the moment they finally realized it, it wouldn't be in my kitchen. It would be in an office with a professional smile and a sentence they weren't prepared to hear. "I'm sorry, but she already handled that." And when that day came, they wouldn't look at me with concern anymore. They'd look at me with something else, something colder, something earned, and I was ready for it. It happened on a Tuesday. Of course it did. Nothing dramatic, no shouting, no confrontation at my kitchen table, just a phone call. My sister called around noon, her voice unusually tight. "Hey," she said, forcing cheer. "Quick question?" I could hear papers shuffling in the background, legal papers. "Yes," I replied, calm, folding laundry like it was any other day. "We met with the attorney this morning," she said. Just to, move things forward. Move things forward, I almost laughed. And I asked. There was a pause, a long one this time. Well, she said slowly, there seems to be a complication. I waited, didn't rush her. Silence makes people uncomfortable when they're losing control. The house, she continued, clearing her throat, it's not available to be transferred. I could hear her breathing now, fast, uneven. The lawyer said it's already in a trust, she added. A private one? I stayed quiet. She said it's been that way for months, my sister went on, before you signed anything with us. I set the towel down neatly. Yes, I said simply, another pause. Why didn't you tell us? She demanded, the sweetness gone. I leaned back against the counter. Because you never asked. Her voice sharpened. You let us believe. I let you believe what you wanted to believe, I interrupted, still calm. You told me everything was just precautionary. You told me not to worry. The silence on the other end was thick now. Finally, she snapped, so what does this mean? I smiled. It means, I said slowly, that I'm still in control of my home, legally, completely. She exhaled hard. You tricked us. No, I corrected. I protected myself. Her tone shifted again, this time to anger. We were trying to help you. I let that hang in the air. Then I said the one thing she wasn't prepared for. If that were true, I said, you would have been relieved to hear I was protected. She didn't answer because she knew. She knew the truth now, the same truth I'd learned weeks ago. This was never about me being safe. It was about them being early. And suddenly they weren't. By the end of the call, her voice was cold. We'll need to reconsider some things, she said. I nodded even though she couldn't see it. You do that, I replied. When the line went dead, I stood there for a long moment, not shaking, not crying, just breathing. Because the game had changed, they knew I wasn't confused. They knew I wasn't passive. And worst of all for them, they knew they'd underestimated me. From that moment on, the visits stopped. The concern vanished. The soft voices disappeared. What replaced them? Distance and resentment. But I didn't feel lonely. I felt free. Because once people realize they can't control you, they stop pretending they ever cared. And honestly, that told me everything I needed to know. The silence afterward was loud. No more just checking in calls, no surprise visits, no soft voices asking how I was feeling today. Weeks passed, then months. And in that quiet, something strange happened. I started breathing easier. I woke up without that tight feeling in my chest. I drank my coffee without someone watching how steady my hands were. I walked through my house without feeling like I was being measured, evaluated, or timed. It turns out peace is a lot easier to find when no one's waiting for you to fail. My sister eventually sent a text. Short, careful, cold. We need to talk at some point. I stared at it for a long time, then I typed back. No, we don't. And that was that. Because here's the part no one warns you about when family shows their true intentions. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't even hurt. I was clear. Clear about who saw me as a person and who saw me as a process. Clear about who cared about my life and who cared about my timeline. I met with my attorney one last time that spring, updated everything, added safeguards, put things in writing so tight even optimism couldn't sneak through the cracks, not out of fear, out of self-respect. I started living again in ways I hadn't since my husband passed. I joined a morning walking group. Started cooking real meals instead of reheating casseroles meant to help. I laughed real laughter with people who didn't look at me like an expiration date. Sometimes late at night, I still thought about my family, about how easily love had turned into calculation. But then I'd look around my house, still standing, still mine, still full of memories that belonged to me, not anyone waiting to inherit them. And that's when I understood something deeply important. They didn't want me dead. They just wanted me out of the way. Quiet, compliant, forgotten. Instead, I stayed. And that was the one thing they never planned for. I didn't share this story to be pitied. And I didn't share it to paint myself as brave or clever. I shared it because somewhere out there, someone is listening who feels that same quiet pressure I felt, the kind that comes wrapped in concern, smiles, and just trying to help. Here's the truth they don't tell you. Sometimes the people who show up the most aren't checking on your heart, they're checking the clock. They talk softly about your future. They ask careful questions about your plans. They bring paperwork instead of comfort. And if you're grieving, if you're tired, if you're alone, that's when they move. Not because you're weak, but because they think you won't notice. What saved me wasn't strength, it was awareness. I listened to the words that didn't match the actions. I noticed how concern turned into distance the moment control disappeared. And I understood that love doesn't come with timelines or conditions. So if this story made you pause, if it felt uncomfortably familiar, please don't ignore that feeling. Ask questions, read every page, protect your voice, your home, and your choices. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stay present, stay informed, stay in your life. If this story meant something to you, please like this video, share it with someone who might need to hear it, and subscribe to Voice of Granny June for more real stories about strength, truth, and standing your ground, even when it's hard. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember, they didn't want me gone forever. They just wanted me quiet. Instead, I stayed.